I was working with the CEO who said the same thing. I was working with him and his top 8 leaders. And he said, we have team meetings all the time, and I'm always asking people for their opinions. I want honesty. And most of the time I say something and people don't speak up. So I assume, great, they're on board with me. And everybody kind of looked at me and they're like, right? It was like...
Welcome to the Masks Off podcast, Leadership Strategies, No Disguises. I'm Razwana Waheed, and together with my co-host Olivier Larvor, we talk to the smartest people in the world of leadership, change and psychology to give leaders real strategies to bring human back to the workplace.
If you would like to support our show, please subscribe to our channel, like us, or share this episode on your social media.
In this episode, we talk to Justin Hale, trainer and keynote speaker at Vitalsmarts, on how to create an environment of trust and uncover what really motivates each employee.
With this change and with this transformation that we can all hear today, what are the major communication issues that leaders or organizations are facing?
We study this a lot. We look at it all the time. One of the things that I think is really interesting is this discussion around culture, right? So the big issues become, but that word is just, it kind of cracks me up because it's sort of an all-purpose word people just throw out when they're unhappy with something, like the culture's bad, I'm leaving, right? It's like this weird word. It almost treat it like it's this ethereal thing that executives pipe through the air conditioning unit so everyone breathes in the culture. Yeah. But we did a study a few years back we called the cultural chasm. And in essence, what we found was there's this massive gap between how executives and leaders see their culture, which in essence means people's beliefs, people's attitudes, people's normal behaviors, what it takes to get along in that organization. There's this massive gap, right? Where we look at executives and leaders, they tend to describe their culture as we're innovative, we're collaborative, we're candid, we care about teamwork. That's our culture. But then in our study, this is 1,200 people, we found that employees tend to say, when describing the culture, they say things like, it's about obedience, it's about being a yes man, it's about deference to authority, it's about competition with my peers to see who's better. And so it's one of the big concerns is in many ways this perception about what I think our normal culture is, meaning our beliefs, our behaviors, our everyday, what it takes to be successful versus what the rest of the organization thinks. And the problem is I implicitly think we're on the same page and then we're not. And then I wonder why there are dysfunctional behaviors or issues that come up or communication gaps like you're talking about.
This discrepancy between what the leaders think and what is the reality of things. So you have kind of you said a gap or something that they don't realize. I think that's the major communication issue, basically. It's people to say authentically and with transparency how it is really. And is it like fear? What is it? What prevents people to really speak their mind and to say, well, this is what I think or this is what I believe of this organization?
It is a really common thing for people not to want to speak truth to authority, right? Truth to power. And I think one of the things to your point about fear, it starts when you're little kids. We find this a lot is that when you're little children, you start to develop this mindset that you have to choose between being honest and being nice, right? I can tell Johnny what I really think about his Halloween costume and I'll hurt his feelings, or I can say nothing and I'll be a friend, but he looks ridiculous, right? Whatever, when you're a little kid, it's no big deal. But when you're an adult, you're sitting in a meeting and the executives say, we need to finish this number of projects and initiatives by this date, and this is your budget, and these are our resources. And everyone's sitting in the room thinking to themselves, that will never happen. It will never. Every January that happens. People sit there, hear the plans, and they go, that's not going to happen. And yet nobody says anything because that mindset starts to dictate how they handle that moment. That fear, they sort of say, if I speak up and speak truth to power and tell them what I really think, I'm going to be seen as someone who rocks the boat. I'm going to be seen as a troublemaker. If I say nothing, at least I'll be seen as a team player, but we're going to run into problems all year long and we might run into a lot of failure. And so we term this in crucial conversations as the fool's choice, the fool's mindset, right? I foolishly convinced myself I have to choose between honesty and respect, candor and being nice. And so it's this either or rather than people starting to think, how can I be honest about my concerns with our culture, with our initiatives, with this proposal, and at the same time be respectful so that it doesn't look like I'm questioning my manager, questioning executives. People don't even start with the and mindset. So because they start with the or mindset, They go straight to either speaking up in kind of a defensive way or going to silence. And in our experience, silence is by far the most common. We did a study a few years back with project managers, and we asked them this question. We said, how many of you are working on a project that you believe was set up to fail from the beginning? And 82% said, that's me. I'm working on at least one, right? For us, research and interviews, that isn't actually super surprising. But what's super surprising is the follow-up question we asked in that study, which was to the 82% who said, yep, I'm working on something that I believe was set up to fail from the beginning. We said, how many of you feel like you can speak up early on in a project when you notice impossible plans or lack of resources? And only 14% said, I feel like I can speak up.
14.
And that's the bigger problem, right? That's the bigger problem. Every organization deals with conversation where your boss says, can't you do it a little faster? Can't you do it without the resources? Right? And the question is, how do we culturally, meaning what is the norm when that conversation pops up? And the problem for employees is I don't feel safe or skilled to speak up. And the problem for leaders is they're not being deliberate enough about creating a culture where people feel like they can speak up or have the skills to speak up. And so now you've got a problem on both sides. So what does it create? Cultures of silence. And that is the most pervasive thing we see in organizations.
I've seen it a lot in the jobs that I've worked in the past, where somebody in the meeting will say to the leader, great idea, we'll get it done. And the second the leader leaves, it's like, holy shit, what are we going to do now? We've said yes to something we can't deliver. So in that moment, what sort of structure or a script can they use to get their point across, to explain the reality of the project not being delivered, and also still remain respectful to the leader in the room?
There's kind of two sides. I'll give you two tips here. One on the side of the employee and one on the side of the leader. For the employee's perspective, our tendency is for people who do speak up a lot and are kind of rocking the boat a lot, they are seen as troublemakers. And one of the reasons why is when they share their opinion, they share it in a way that is often abrasive, or they share it in a way that's so opinion-filled that people just feel like, well, that's your perception. The worst thing you can do when speaking up is fill your perspective or what you're sharing with opinions. So what people tend to do is they say things like, this is going to be a total failure. I just got to say it. Nobody else in the room is going to speak up, but I'm going to say it. This is going to be a failure. And then, of course, the leader gets defensive. What ends up happening is, and then people will say, well, I just say it how it is. The problem is, how you think it is and how it really is isn't always the same thing. Right. And so just because you're sharing opinions in a really abrasive or open way doesn't mean you're stating the facts of the situation. So the first tip is for people that are sharing it, always come with specific observable data. If you're going to come, you want to be able to say, look, hey, can I speak up about something? I just want to share a quick perspective. Yeah. I noticed that what you're asking is for us to do X, Y, and Z in 8 months with this amount of resources. If you remember last year, we had a similar request that was blah, 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 blah. And what we found is it actually took us 10 months and we needed X number of resources on top of what was originally spec'd out. My concern is we're running into the same type of thing. So the idea is in the script, it should be really simple. You start with facts. And when I say facts, I don't just mean your facts. I mean actually observable things that if you put them in the conversation, people would go, I can't disagree with that, right? It's a measurable, it's observable, maybe it's history, maybe we have documentation of it. And then after you share those facts, it makes your opinions much more powerful to say, this is my concern. My concern is we're making promises we can't keep again. And we all know what that means for the client. When we deliver and it's broken and we have to go back afterwards like we did with the Jarman account last year, it's more expensive. It frustrates the client and none of us want that. So I just want to speak up about that concern. So the first is to start with facts. I think that's always the most important. Right. Share facts that are relevant to the situation that people will agree with. Saying things like, this is ridiculous, that doesn't help. It just makes other people in the room defensive. And yet we feel like we're prophets of justice because we spoke up, right? We got in there, and at least we're the ones who have the respect to really speak up. The problem is there's a reason why it didn't go well. It wasn't because people didn't want to hear your message. It's because all you were sharing were opinions. So the first is facts. The second is managers and leaders need to do a better job of inviting that kind of thing. Let me give you an example. So there's a gentleman named Rich Sheridan. He's the CEO of a small company called Menlo Innovations there in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He wrote a book called Joy Inc. because of the success of his company. It's a small company. So leaders that are mid-level managers can relate to this. If you're maybe a director over a group of 30 or a mid-level manager, they do custom software development. Which, if you know anything about that, it's over budget, it's past deadline, it's buggy. I mean, that is a tough industry to be in because of the amount of issues that could pop up because of the type of work you're doing. This guy has almost 100% customer satisfaction, and he finishes like 75% of their large-scale initiatives on time, which, by the way, that industry is more like 40%, and their customer satisfaction is terrible because it just lends itself to mistakes. And so people fly in from all over the world to Menlo, to this place outside Detroit, and they say, Rich, what are you doing to create this kind of success. And what most people think is he must have some awesome technology that makes him so efficient. But when you ask him this, he says things like this. This is his own words. He'll say things like, the most important piece of accountability is that I get accountability from my team members, that when we're making estimates, that if they start working on a project that they've given me an estimate for and they find that it's going to take longer, that they have to speak up to their project manager and say, I thought it was going to take me 8 hours. It's going to take me 12. Now, given that I've given them that opportunity and I've asked for that accountability, what do I have to give them back?
Right.
I teach my project managers deliberately. He said, I literally teach them that when someone comes to them and says, I'm going to be in trouble against my estimate, we're going to be behind. I teach my project managers to say, thank you for sharing that bad news with me, and to smile. And to smile when they say, thank you for sharing that bad news with me. Why? Because in most organizations, people want to squish bad news. Or maybe they say thank you, but their facial expression says, I wish you wouldn't have told me that. So he teaches his project managers to smile and say, I'm so glad you spoke up. We value that here. When organizations don't welcome that bad news or people to speak up and disagree, that bad news goes underground in the culture, meaning it results in, to your point, conversations after the meeting. It results in quality issues, morale issues, endless hours of overtime, people trying to fulfill deadlines they were given rather than that they volunteered. And so he teaches his project managers to smile and say, thank you for sharing that bad news with me. Let's sit down and you share with me the facts about your concerns about the estimate. Let's make sure you fully understand the expectation. And if we're both on the same page, let's talk about what we're going to do to let the client know that we're running into concerns and what they want to do. That kind of thing. It's not a software. It's human beings deliberately behaving slightly differently in the right kinds of moments. So to your question about the tips is, what are the key moments where people tend to go to silence, where it has a disproportionate impact on failure? And maybe it is in a project meeting, maybe it's at the beginning of a project. Find the moments that if people acted differently, meaning they spoke up, it would have a disproportionate impact on the success of that initiative or project or whatever it might be. And then look at it and say, what are our current behaviors? Current behaviors tend to be silent. How do we intervene in that moment from the employee side, giving them skills and scripts of starting with facts? How do we intervene at the manager side of them deliberately saying, we value speaking up. We want you to come with bad news because we'd rather hear it now than later. We invite it.
I love it. Very, very, very powerful. And I love this very simple trick about smile. I guess it's not like fake smile like this, like this. I think it goes more than that. It's like this empathy and to say it's okay. You know, we create this safe environment to everyone to say you can share, you know, and we are all together and we will find a solution together. So it's a different mindset, I guess.
You see enough positive results because of that behavior.
Yeah.
People start to feel like, oh, it's a good thing. Like,
exactly.
Because if I don't speak up, then I'm going to get in more big trouble later on when the product launches with bugs.
I absolutely love it, actually. That's how you get away from a culture of fear, actually, that is intangible inside the organization. You mentioned something. You mentioned the thing about the technology. Today, in terms of communication, it's about Slack, it's about Yammer, it's about digital platforms. So, okay, we have an issue with communication. Let's put a platform in order to bridge the gap and find a solution with our communication problem. What's your take on that?
I think it can be a great solution for moving quickly and getting things done faster for day-to-day normal conversation. But one of the focuses that we do in our research and our work is not on the everyday, just please pass the butter kind of conversations. Like, hey, will you send me this document? Those tend to not be the reasons why organizations struggle. Right. The reason why organizations struggle is that moment when you disagree or that moment where someone doesn't deliver. And so I think some of those technologies can be excellent. But the problem becomes is when you're doing that and then all of a sudden a problem comes up, an issue comes up. I disagree with what you said, or I don't like what you said. What do I do in that moment? Now, most people tend to realize, oh, they can't see me, so I'm just going to stop typing or I'm going to sort of fudge it a little bit and not really be honest. The best thing I think people can do in that moment is actually make it as human as possible. So if in that moment you feel a tinge of he's getting defensive, I'm getting defensive, get on something like a Skype or a FaceTime or something that can make it as close to possible as a face-to-face conversation if you can't be. Why? Because then that forces people to realize they're talking to humans and they need to have a real crucial conversation about a concern. Not every conversation is crucial. In reality, I think there's 5% of people's day that has a massive impact on the success of the organization. It's when things go wrong or in disagreements, right? I think that's a big tip. I think that technology can be excellent. But when things start to go wrong, you hear a lot of these people that are remote employees saying, I'm not feeling like other people are fighting for my priorities. I feel like people don't get back to me. I feel like people change things without warning me. The ability to be able to keep people in the loop constantly, that technology should allow that. But then as soon as there's a concern, we need to get as close to possible, being on the phone, being on FaceTime, being on Skype. That's a better way to handle it rather than continuing to type. The nuances are lost. They tend to be lost. And the truth is, you're not working with robots. You know, some people are like, let's just keep it business related. Let's not get emotional. I'm like, oh, that's easy to say if you are working with robots, but you're working with humans who perceive, who think, who feel. And I'm not suggesting that we should always be talking about feelings, but when you're talking with human beings, you might actually offend someone, or you might actually say something that will make someone misbelieve what you're trying to say. Wouldn't you just want to make it clear? Let's figure out a way to cut through that with some FaceTime.
Going back to your point about honesty and, you know, fostering an organization where honesty is respected and invited. In your experience, what resistance have you seen in leaders when you suggest that to them?
What's interesting is most of the leaders will feel like their culture is honest. Like I was sitting in a meeting the other day, and it was like an all hands type of meeting. And the CEO said there was open mic time at the end, right? And the CEO said, "What do you? I'd love to get any questions about anything about our growth, our revenue, our current new products, anything like that." And it was total crickets. 75% of the leaders that I work with or so would say, "Oh, silence equals agreement," right? Silence equals agreement. I was working with the CEO who said the same thing. I was working with him and his top 8 leaders. And he said, we have team meetings all the time, and I'm always asking people for their opinions. I want honesty. And most of the time I say something and people don't speak up. So I assume, great, they're on board with me. And everybody kind of looked at me and they're like, right? It was like, you know, I'm like, they can see you, right? And so first of all, leaders tend to believe that it's more honest than it really is. I think one of the most important things people can do in terms of leadership is when you do employee engagement surveys or whatever you do to measure the happiness, the engagement, the satisfaction of your employees, don't just ask quantitative questions that have scores on a 5 or 7 point scale. One of the most powerful things you can do is ask people to tell stories. Say, give one word that you would say describes our culture or our culture of honesty or our communication culture, and then just give a story down below. It all needs to be anonymous because you want people to be honest. Tell a story down below that illustrates why you picked the word that you did. And you start to get these incredibly interesting stories. And you only need to read about 5 to 10, even an organization of 100, 150, 200. You only need to read 5 to 10 to get a good feel for the culture of honesty. Now, the other pushback sometimes you get from leaders is this sense of, well, I don't have time to get everybody's opinion on everything, which is fine, right? One of the things that leaders can do a better job at is whenever they start a meeting or start a big conversation is they need to be clear about what kind of decision-making process is being used. So think about it this way. There's some decisions that are command decisions, right? Meaning the CEO or the leader is just going to make it and they're not going to ask anybody's opinion. That's okay. There's some decisions that just happen that way. And they don't need to be a kind of consensus. So command. The other might be a consult, right? I'm going to get everybody's opinions. I want to know what you think, and then I will make the final decision. The other would be voting, right? We're going to go with majority, and the last would be consensus. So one of the problems is leaders go into meetings or in conversations, and people in the meeting come in with this idea of must be a consensus. When it ends up being consult, the employees are disappointed. They feel like this is not our culture of honesty. I thought I was going to come in and people are going to take my opinion. We're going to leave till I was happy. And then the problem is, it's not that a leader has to make every conversation consensus, but what a leader should be doing is doing a better job of saying, you know what, look, group, there are some things that we just don't have time to make everything consensus. And it's not the most effective way to make all of our decisions. But this decision today is consult. So I want to take half an hour, opinions from the group. I want to get some data. And then I'm going to make the best decision I think possible after hearing all your perspectives. I feel like most human beings don't have an innate need to always have their way so much as they have an innate need to have their way heard and considered. And when it's gone on long enough that people don't feel like they have their way heard and considered, they start complaining. And leaders say, oh, everybody just wants their way. We can't have their way. So that's a pushback we get, right? No, what you're getting from that is when people are saying they're not getting their way, what likely is happening underneath that is the fact they don't feel heard. And when you don't feel heard enough, you start to express it like nobody ever listens to me, nobody ever hears, nobody ever takes my ideas. And if you're feeling heard more often, people don't tend to have that kind of complaint.
It's really about how we change this leadership style as well. You know, how we can be transparent and to say this is how it is, guys. You mentioned engagement. Engagement is very, very important here today. You know, it's one of the top number one priority for companies because they know how important. If you have engagement, productivity will rise, and all the good stuff. So they say also that a manager needs to become a leader, right? A leader, inspire people, engage people. Forget the top-down thing, and let's be a little bit more open, transparent, vulnerable, authentic, all this kind of stuff. So how can we do that? What is the transition phase in order to achieve that?
One of the funniest things you hear, and this seems like the simplest thing in the world, when we did our research around managing remote employees, for example, one of the things you heard was the things that the employees in the office said that made the relationship with remote employees more successful is they said, when our leaders are clear with those remote employees about expectations. And then when you ask the remote employees, when you said, hey, what does a leader do that makes you feel most successful? They tended to say, when a leader actually got to know me as a human being, right? Now, this is an interesting balance, right? So their colleagues in the office are saying, I just want them to do their jobs. And as long as expectations are clear, that's a good leader. They treat those remote people right. The remote people are saying, hey, I'm a human being out here. I'm not just on a screen. I'm somewhere doing work with this team, and yet you don't see me. But so it's kind of this interesting moment. And that's difficult for a lot of leaders because you feel like you don't have time. Yeah. You feel like you have all these priorities. And so you think, I don't have time to sit down and get to know people and ask all these questions. And it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of time. But the thing that people need to do a good job, to your point of moving from sort of a manager to a leader, is this sense of, I'm getting to know my people. Now, why does that matter from a business perspective? Is because if your goal is to motivate people to be better, it turns out you have to understand what motivates them. Like, everybody is motivated. We don't tend to think that, right? We see lazy people think they're not motivated. Everybody is motivated by something, right? Even your employee who doesn't do the job of wiping the tables down, he's super motivated to go home and play video games for 3 hours, right? Everybody is motivated. The problem is, they're just not motivated to do what you want them to do for the reasons you want them to do it. So what your job is as a leader is to make a connection between what already motivates them, what do they value, what do they care about, what's important to them, and what you're trying to get them to do in terms of engagement and productivity and work. Right. So, there's a Forbes article a number of years back where they talked about millennials. But the article said something like 40% of millennials that they studied in this study said that they would take less money to work for an organization that was doing work that connected with their values or their personal mission, right? Now, they're not saying they're working for free, but that should tell, to your question, that should tell a leader something. If I'm trying to go from being a manager or in management to being a leader, I need to understand that if I have an employee who cares most about mission, about value, about touching lives, about impact on the universe, then that would be good for me to know, versus I might have an employee who values most their incentives and their pay, which is fine. There's no judging there. But the leader has to understand that. So if people have sort of a hierarchy or prioritization of what motivates them most, maybe one person wants to have a good work-life balance because what's most important is I want to spend time with my family. Another person says, I don't have a family. What's important to me is I want to go change the world. Another person may say, look, I want to make X amount of money, so my goal is to be successful in a way that allows me to grow. You need to understand that. You need to understand that. And you need to understand that because when things go wrong, when you have a crucial conversation with someone, you need to be able to connect to what they already care about. Leaders tend to try to motivate people around things that they care about. They say, I had a guy that I was leading, that I was managing a while ago. I remember thinking to myself, there's some performance concerns with him. And I remember thinking to myself, well, doesn't he want to change? Because if he does, he can get promoted and make more money. Don't you want to make more money? Right? I want to make more money. I love money, right? And so, in essence, I was sort of reflecting some of my own values and motivations on, I want to perform so that I can make more money. So I had this crucial conversation with him. And upon listening and understanding, and this is the skill I mentioned to you, leaders need to get to know their people. I said, look, I need to understand something. What do you care about? Like, what's most important to you? Where do you want to see yourself? Why do you want to grow, or what's important to you? And it's interesting because he said, look, yes, would I like to get promoted? Would I like to make more money? Of course. But you know what I really care about? I want to be seen as the guy that's most reliable in this company. Right. I want to be seen as someone who has a brand of, when I go to him, he knows the answer. That's most important to me. It's like, whoa. As soon as I knew that, I could do a better job of making a connection between the productivity I wanted and what he really cared about. Throwing money, that motivation, didn't motivate him. And I was just trying to reflect my own motivation. So it's a big deal for managers to become leaders, to get to know what do your people care about, what do they value, what are their personal motivations, and that's helpful.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Once again, if you would like to support our show, please subscribe to our channel, like us, or share this episode on your social media. Merci